So today's daf is Zion, and we are ahead, and we pick up with where the Gemara says, um, Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda Omer. It's about 6 lines before the lines get wide. There's a little bet in parentheses right at the beginning of the line. Okay, so Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda Omer. So now what we're discussing is the debate of Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, where we said that first of all the Mishnah said there's a minimum of how much you pay for an olat riyah, either 2 ma'ah of kesef or 1 ma'ah, 2 coins of silver or one. And then we have the famous Mishnah and Peah that says Re'ayon does not have a shi'ur. So what does that mean? So the first thing the Gemara says is it doesn't even have a minimum amount, even though we just said it did, because that's only rabbinic. But now we're looking at the question about whether it might have a maximum amount, and a debate between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, where Rabbi Yochanan says that there is no shi'ur for appearing in the Azara, and Reish Lakish says there's no shi'ur for korbanot. So that sounds like Reish Lakish is giving you more latitude. Bring as many korbanot as you want. But the Gemara actually translates that as more demanding. That what Reish Lakish is really saying is, yes, I agree with Rabbi Yochanan. You can come to the Beis HaMikdash and appear as many times as you want on the regel, but every time you appear, you have to bring a korban. It says, Lo yira'u panai rekam, don't appear empty-handed. So you can come as often as you want, but each time over the course of the regular, you have to bring a korban. Now, of course, Rabbi Yochanan admits that there is an idea of lo yira'u panai rekam, but that's only the first time. That's only on the first day. The first day of Yontiv, you appear, you have to bring a korban. Presumably, although the Gemara doesn't spell it out, presumably, though, even if you would come multiple times on Yontiv, for Rabbi Yochanan, it was only a demand that first appearance be with a korban. Look, you can ask interesting hypothetical questions according to Rabbi Yochanan. Let's say the first appearance was empty-handed, without a korban, and then you come a second time on the first day. There, do you have to, would you transgress again, or if you did not bring a korban once you blew it the first time? So, you can raise these types of interesting questions, but nevertheless, Rabbi Yochanan's basic point is that you've got to bring a korban at the beginning. After that, there's no need to always bring something with you when you show up on Yontiv. And Reish Lakish says whenever you show up on Yontiv, even after you brought a korban, even on Chol HaMoed, it always has to be with a korban in hand. Okay, and now we continue with that debate. So we turn Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Esfei, Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda Omer, again about 6 lines before the lines get wide. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda says, "Braita shalosh regalim bashana mitztavu Yisrael lalot beregel." 3 times in the year, the Bnei Yisrael were commanded to be olo l'regel. No chiddush yet. B'chag hamatzos, b'chag hashavos, b'chag hasukot. Ve'ein yirin chatzaim. They cannot come half. Mishum shenemar kol zuchorcha, all of your males. So what does that mean? Half of the community come, half not come. Not exactly clear what that means. Ve'ein yirin rekanim, and they cannot appear empty-handed. Mishum shenemar v'lo yira'u panai rekam. So anyway, you see, well, whatever this half means, which we'll revisit in a minute, you see this idea that they can't come empty-handed. So that presumably says the Gemara means every time you come, you have to have a korban. So Gemara says, no, Amalei, says Rabbi Yochanan back, the Ikar HaRegel, that's on the Ikar HaRegel, means on the first day. On the first day when you appear, you have to have a korban, but on Chol HaMoed, and maybe even later in that same day, if you've already brought it once, but certainly on Chol HaMoed, you don't have to be coming with a korban. Okay, Ezer Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. So now Rabbi Yochanan challenged Reish Lakish. Yir'eh Yera'eh. So again, this whole play on see and to be seen. Again, I'll point out that the simple read of the verse, without, if we did not have the Masoretic vocalization, the verse really suggests the reading of Yir'eh, to see Pnei Hashem, because it says the word es, Yir'eh kol zuchacha et Pnei. Just think about the verse we quoted, by the way, from the Nevi'im, Ki tavo le'ra'ot panai, right? So even there, le'ra'ot panai is an attempt to make it in the passive, but it doesn't read. To le'ra'ot lifanai maybe, but lir'ot panai. The simple sense of all those verses is to see the face of God, but that's obviously very heavily anthropomorphic, so we wind up reading it le'ra'ot, to appear before. But because of that other clear reading that's in the text, the Gemara multiple times sort of raises that and speaks about the idea of seeing and being seen. And so here it's doing it. So before we had it about the issue of blind and one eye, etc. Here we're doing it again. Let's take a look. Yir'eh Yera'eh, Ma ani b'chinam, the same way I get to see you for free, so afatem b'chinam, you can see me, God, for free. Okay, so you don't have to bring a korban, which is, a pretty audacious read. Here the verse says, Lo yira'u panai rekam, and the Gemara says, yeah, but, I get to see you for free, you can get to see me for free. So what does this mean? So you see there's a possibility of appearing in the mikdash without a korban. Ella says, Gemara, you're right. We have to say that because of this breita, doesn't even clear like where this breita is from or whatever. It doesn't even say Titania anyway. But because of this, you see Reish Lakish would have to admit it's possible to appear in the mikdash without a korban. Ella says, Gemara, reject what we even saying. Kol heicha da'asa v'lo aisi. If you come to the mikdash without a korban in hand, kulei amalo pligi da'aya lumitchazi. You can bring it and you can be seen. Okay, so that's Yera'eh. So presumably, though, that means on the Chol Moed. Obviously, certainly initially, there's an idea that you can't appear empty-handed. But in terms of coming after that first time, everybody agrees you can come. You don't have to bring a korban after the first time. Now, before the nafik, so you go, you appear, and you leave, even without bringing a korban, presumably as long as you brought one initially. Now, before we get on to say where they do debate, I just want to pause for a moment and note that we just had a whole Amud where Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish were challenging one another. Primarily, Reish Lakish was challenging Rabbi Yochanan, quoting braysos that made it sound like every single time you appear, you have to bring a korban. And now the Gemara is saying, you know what? Based on this last brayta that Rabbi Yochanan quoted, really everybody agrees that when you appear, on an ongoing basis, you don't have to bring a korban. So what about all those questions that Reish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan? If Reish Lakish agrees to Rabbi Yochanan, right, that you don't have to bring a korban, what was he doing asking all those questions that made it sound like you do have to bring a korban? So in a few places, the Gemara does things like this, and Tosfos elsewhere, not here, but elsewhere, those other places, comments and says, so according to this conclusion of the Gemara, that whole conversation before never happened, right? So that whole back and forth, what about this, what about that? Oh, that's in Chol Hamoed, but the first day, actually in the end, Reish Lakish agrees. So that whole conversation never happened. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean they misremembered conversation? No, what it really means is, and this is important, is that very often the Gemara presents a conversation, but it really is reconstructing it. It's not actually claiming that Reish Lakish asked this question to Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yochanan responded. It knows that there's this debate. And what the Gemara is doing is it's standing in for Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. But 1 minute, what would Rabbi Yochanan do with this question? What would Reish Lakish with this source? What would Reish Lakish do with that source? So in order to ask it, they're basically framing it as if Rabbi Lakish challenged Rabbi Yochanan with that source, and Rabbi Yochanan responded, and Rabbi Yochanan challenged Reish Lakish and Reish Lakish. But really, the Gemara is constructing the conversation. And the Gemara is just presenting the sources and the potential answers on both sides.
What does that mean for a concept of Torah Shabbat?
Well, it doesn't. I don't think it means anything because I think the question is whether you are aware of the device. Meaning, it's like when you tell people that if you read the Gemara clearly, you see that the Gemara is sometimes like interjecting commentary within an original memra, right? The Gemara is interjecting, so people feel cheated. What do you mean? It sounds like so and so is saying it. How could you say that the Gemara is inserting its comments in it? Okay, you only feel cheated if you weren't aware that that was the device being used. If you're aware of the device, then it's not a problem. So the original debate is true. Rabbi Yochanan said Riyat Panim and Reish Lakish said Riyat Korban. And then you understand that from that point on, the Gemara is trying to reconstruct exactly what do they mean and how would they respond to different texts. So even if it does it by saying Rabbi Yochanan says this, Reish Lakish says that, if you understand the device being used, it's not being misrepresented. Right? You only feels misrepresented if you didn't understand that was the device.
That's true from a formal perspective, but philosophically, it also suggests that there's a dynamic quality that is intrinsic to the process of transmission. In other words, at some point, we retroactively confer authority to that. We can't do it ourselves in the same way.
Right.
But there's a kind of, it depends upon the dynamic of human imagination and thought process.
Right, I would agree. I mean, it's certainly, yes, it is. I mean, look, we wind up doing it nowadays, you have a machlokas, I know, Rambam and Ravid. You say, yeah, but what would Ravid do with this? Well, he would probably say that. And what would the Rambam do that? Well, he would probably say this. So we just say the words, he would probably say, whereas the Gemara actually constructs it as an ongoing dialogue. And you're right, there's a power to that living dynamic, as if they're still arguing and we're the vehicle for their continued arguing. Okay, so anyway, but that's what the Gemara does. That whole conversation didn't happen. Okay, Reish Lakish agrees to Rabbi Yochanan that when you appear later on Chol HaMoed, you can appear without a korban. It's only the first appearance has to be with a korban. So then what's the debate? So let's take a look. Ella, kol echad da'asi, the asi, we'll read it again, first white line. Kol echad da'asi v'lo icy, if you appear and don't bring a korban, kol yamalo pligi da'ayel mit chazi v'nafik, you can show, come up, appear, and leave.
Keep pligi, at some point, right?
Well, that's what I said. Presumably that means after the first time. Okay, so presumably after the first time you can come without a korban. Keep pligi, so what's the debate? The asav icy, that you came and you wanted to bring a korban. You wanted to bring a korban after you had already brought your first one. This reads better, actually, a simple read of the debate. Rabbi Yochanan says there's no limit to the number of times you can appear ba'azara in the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, there's no limit to the number of times you want to appear. Come and come again. But korban yesh la shi'ur. But you cannot bring a korban multiple times. You only can bring a korban once. Now that's very bizarre. Since when is there ever a limit to the number of times I can bring a korban? But first of all, right, there are two issues. First of all, if you're bringing on the first day Yontiv, it's an Ola. So there's already like a problematic about bringing an Ola on the first day of Yontiv, and we're going to see about that in a little bit. Okay, so but that's one aspect. But the other point, even beyond that, is, and Tosa says we're only talking about the first day Yontiv. There's no problem bringing as many Olas as you want on Chol Hamoed. But besides the Yontiv aspect, like is it accept mutter on Yontiv to do it? Tosa frames it as there's like a type of a Baal Tosef aspect. If you wanted to just bring a korban anytime, fine. But if you want to bring it on the first day of Yontiv in the context of this is my appearing in the Mikdash and lo yeru panei rekam, and my appearing being ola l'regel, and as such I'm bringing a korban. So there the Torah only sort of dictates one korban, and somehow there's a sense of doing it multiple times is adding to the to what it means to bring a korban in the context of appearing in the Mikdash. To bring a korban for the sake of a korban, you're always entitled. But to bring a korban in the context of what it means to be ola l'regel, there the Torah only prescribed one korban. So that's what Rabbi Yochanan says. And Reish Lakish says, Reish Lakish Amariyas panim b'korban. No, you can come as often as you want with a korban. You have to once. And any more you want to come, please bring a korban, be my guest. Dafilu korban nami ein l'shiur. You're even entitled to bring a korban multiple times. That fits better with the words of ein l'shiur. It's harder to understand the position of Rabbi Yochanan in that context, why he would limit it. And if you see for just where the little letter is as an indication, Rambam actually rules like Reish Lakish, even though normally we don't rule like Reish Lakish. Okay, so the Gemara says Eisvei. So now we're going to have one final exchange of
Ola on Yontiv. Is that what you're saying? A couple of times, even though you're not going to get it.
Right. Eisvei, right, and that's also a Yontiv Chiddush, right? That you're allowed to do it on Yontiv because it gets the context, it gets the status, the same thing that made Rabbi Yochanan have a problem with it, which is it's not just a korban. It's a way of expressing your appearing in the Mikdash, your type of being ola l'regel, your iyat panim. So if that's the context that it gets on the first day Yontiv, and that's the context it's coming, then that also might give it a license to be brought on Yontiv if you say that that's acceptable.
I wouldn't say you can do that the last day.
No, this is only for the first day. At least that's the way Tosus frames it. Chol Hamoed, last days. Yeah, you're right. Last days would then be another Yontiv issue. So that's a good point. So presumably this is only on the first day. That creates the problem. But that also, if you say that that's acceptable, might mean that what allows it to be done even on Yontiv. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this: Eisvei, or Rabbi Yochanan challenged Reish Lakish. Hoka raglecha mi beit re'echa. So make your steps dear, meaning like not too common in the house of your friend, God. So, which is understood to be like a certain amount of restraint. But of course, what do you mean?
You said in. Right?
Oh, in, from. Okay. So, Hassam. So you see, there's a sense of restraint, and we just agreed the restraint you can come as often as you want. So the restraint must be in bringing korbanot. So the Gemara says no. No. They're talking about sin offerings. Don't sin so much. Don't come to the Beit HaMikdash so much that you have to always bring sin offerings. Rabbi Levi, like Rabbi Levi. The Rabbi Levi Rami. Rabbi Levi showed a contradiction. See, one verse says, make your steps dear, from your friend's house. I will come to your house with burnt offerings. Very conveniently, the second pasuk explicitly said burnt offerings, so that's okay to bring it multiple times. But Lord, for shlamim, not just burnt offerings, even shlamim, but something that's not based on sin. Tanya Namihachi, we taught similarly. That's sin offerings. You should try to minimize the number of times you have to come to the Beis HaMikdash for that purpose. Maybe it means even minimize the amount of burnt offerings and peace offerings. A shelem l'cha nidarai, that's where you get the shlamim, right? An olah and my vows, and so vow could be a shlamim. Hooray, olot shlamim and more. So that's your free will offerings, your burnt offerings and your peace offerings. Amani mikayim hokav raglucha min beit re'echa, keep your feet dear, rare from your from your friend's house. That's talking about sin offerings. Very nice, quoting the pasuk of Beit Re'echa, way of saying about what it means to go to the temple. God's our friend. But anyway, so that is the way the Gemara concludes the debate, that if you come after the first day of Yontiv, actually, again, quite ironic, because, you really heard where Rabbi Yochanan was talking about. It says, Lo yireu penai rekam. It's not an unreasonable read to say that every time you appear over the regel, you have to bring a korban. But the Gemara winds up rejecting that with this pretty audacious read of Yira Yera'eh. I see you've been free, you see me for free. Read exactly counter to the verse of Lo yireu penai rekam, and therefore basically allow appearing in the Mikdash multiple times without a korban over the Chag, other than the first time. And then in the end, it really becomes an issue about bringing about whether you're allowed to bring multiple korbanot in the not as a stam as a korban, but in the context of an olat riyah, whether that is allowed or not. The debate of Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Yes.
Isn't an olah an atonement for failure to fulfill a positive commandment?
Yeah, the Gemara reframes olah as a type of sin-related korban, but not always. It's certainly not the simple sense very often of it, but the Gemara does try to frame it often in that context, but not here.
The psukim notwithstanding, it's like how many times you have to go to someone's house on Shabbos before you don't feel obligated to bring a bottle.
Right.
I mean, it's the same feeling. It's like.
Right. It's a good point. Yep. Okay. Now, Einir and Chachan, we're going to end dealing with unpacking this writer that says don't appear half. What does half mean? Svaver of Yosef Lameimar Mandi Islay Esrim Banim Asar Banim Lo Lisku Ha'idna Chamisha Ulamachar Chamisha. So it means that if somebody has, what does it mean don't come half? It means if you have 10 kids, don't bring 5 of them on the first day Yontiv and 5 of them on the second day on Chol HaMoed. They should all come on the first day. So the Gemara says, what? You need a pasuk for that. Amalei Abayu Pshita, obviously. Haminayu mashvis luposhim, haminayu mashvis luzrizim. How could it be that you should bring 5 today and 5 tomorrow? The 5 you're going to bring tomorrow will be considered negligent. You're supposed to come on the first day Yontiv. B'di'eved, you can bring your olas re'i on any day of Chol HaMoed. But the primary obligation is to bring it on the first day of Yontiv. Remember what the Gemara said before. Ikar haregel. The first day is when you're supposed to appear. So I don't need a pasuk to tell me don't make half of your family negligent. Of course. Which are you going to make negligent, and which are you going to make, not zealous, but what's the word, zariz. Anyway, what's the word for zariz? Anyway, not punctilious. It's more like eager. Yeah, but it's all right. Anyway, okay. So anyway, which are you going to make negligent, and which are you going to make the opposite? So anyway, Ella kralamai asa. So what's the verse coming to tell you of not to come half? So lechet acherim, like what the teaching we had in the name of acherim, the Tanya we taught, acherim omrim hamekamet, and we saw this before. The person who deals with like dung for like types of leather working, v'amitzarif nechoshet, or smelts copper by the mines, v'aborsi, or a tanner. All of these people that are very smelly are exempt from coming up from re'iyah. Shenemar kol zuchorchan. That was the pasuk quoted before, but it says not half, all, not half. Only somebody that could be part of the entire community. That you don't have to split the group into 2 groups. These half come separate from those half, because those half are the smelly halves. So rather than splitting them into 2 groups, you just exclude them. So these that would not be able to come with the whole community, they don't come at all. So it's only everybody that can come as one type of a coherent community. So we saw this before. So now, by the way, if you take a look, there's an interesting Rashi, not in terms of his interpretation, but just look at Rashi. Rashi says, El the 3rd line from the top. That's what it means, don't appear half. People that can only come in a small subgroup, that's what it means not to come in half, because these people can only come in a subgroup. All right, they can't come with everyone else. Fine. Anyway, but that Rashi says, that seems to me how to interpret this Gemara. But my colleagues mefarshim in a different way. So I don't want to go into what his colleagues explained, but it just sounded fascinating, because very often in Rashi you'll have Rabbosai, my Rebbeim have explained it differently, or this is the interpretation I have from my Rebbeim. I don't know Certainly don't remember off the top of my head. Other times when Rashi speaks about his colleagues have a different interpretation. Who are Rashi's colleagues? I don't know. Okay, anyway, so, all right. So now Rashi is one of those people you don't think had too many, too many peers. Anyway, looking on to the next Mishnah. Olos b'moed. So now we're off after the first Mishnah, which is all about who's exempt from the Olat Riyah. And now we get to the more general discussion of korbanot that are brought on Yontiv. So we've already alluded to a certain issue about the ability to bring an Ola that you're not obligated on the first day Yontiv. That'll turn into the focus right here. Okay, Olot b'moed. So bringing an Ola on Chol HaMoed, Bos min achulin, moed means Chol HaMoed, can come from non-sanctified funds, meaning as opposed to money that you've already designated. You took a vow and you said that you are going to obligate yourself in a korban, or you set aside money and you sanctified for the purpose of the korban. And you just generically, I'm going to bring an ola, or this money is sanctified for an ola. Can I use this money to satisfy a specific type of an obligation? Now it's the regel. I have to bring an olat miyah. Can I use this money that I sanctified for generic ola purposes to satisfy that obligation or not? Or similarly, we understood that there's an idea of shlamei Hagigah. I took upon myself in the middle of the year to bring a shlamim. Comes along, or sanctified money for shlamim. Comes along the regel, can I put that money towards a shlamei simcha? And the general rule is that dvarim shebechova, things that are obligations, einam barim elamin achulim, can only come from non-sanctified funds. You can't double dip. You can't satisfy your obligation with money that you've already sanctified for some other purpose or even a generic purpose. If that money is already sanctified, it cannot say, oh, let's just use this for this other thing. Okay? So here we talks about this ability to use to bring an ola on Chol HaMoed, and presumably it means some type of obligatory ola, right? Because you're not allowed, you can only bring it from unsanctified funds. So the only obligatory olas that we know about on Yontiv is the olat riyah. Okay, so presumably the context is you did not bring your olat riyah on Yontiv, you want to bring it on Chol HaMoed. You still have to be careful not to bring it, to only bring it from unsanctified funds. Olot b'moed ba'ot min achulin, they come from unsanctified funds. V'ashlamim, but the shlamim on Chol HaMoed, which again, what does that mean? Shlamei simcha or shlamei Hagigah? Remember, there are two types of shlamim. One to fulfill the verse that says v'chagosem so chag, to celebrate it as a chag means to bring shlamim, and the other to fulfill the obligation of simcha, which means the meat of shlamim. So now it says, V'hashlamim mina ma'aser. Shlamim, you can actually use ma'aser money. So ma'aser money, I gave you the example of money already sanctified. You just put aside money and say, I'm sanctifying this for an ola or shlamim. But here's another example, right? Two out of every 3 years in the ma'aser cycle, the second tithe is ma'aser ani. What are you supposed to do with ma'aser ani? Right? You take a tenth. You either bring all that food up to Yerushalayim, or you make your life easier. You transfer it onto money. You bring the money up to Yerushalayim. What do you do with that? Meiser Sheni. I said Meiser Ani. I'm sorry, I meant Meiser Sheni. 2 out of every 3 years is Meiser Sheni. What do you do with that Meiser Sheni money now that you have it in Yerushalayim? What does the Torah say you do with it? You buy it and you buy food with it. How about using it and bringing korbanot that I can eat the meat of the korbanot, like a shlamim? Great, why not? You get to bring a korban and you get to use the money towards food. And anyway, in general, if you imagine the purpose of Meiser Sheni is to give people that opportunity to have that encounter with God, and the smachta lifnei Hashem, rejoice before God in Yerushalayim, and so on. So what better use of that than to use the money to bring the shlamim? So I once was talking to this woman who actually had converted. She was a very frum Christian, and now she was being a frum Jew, and now she had become a frum Jew. She sort of told me that when she was a Christian, like they were very frum, her and her husband, they both converted, and they, tithed all their income, and they really followed the Torah, so they took a double tithe. So the first tithe they used for charity purposes, and the second tithe they made sure to use it for religious pilgrimages, and to go on sort of trips of religious encounter, which is like the Meiser Sheni idea. So it's really a real good kiyum of the Meiser Sheni idea. So anyway, we don't do that. So anyway, so you have this money, so you bring it to Yerushalayim and you use it to bring a korban. So maybe I can use that korban. Hey, I'm going up on the regel. Let's save my Meiser Sheni money because I'm anyway going to take a trip during the regel. I'll bring that money. I'll bring the korban, and hey, let's use it to bring my shlamei simcha or my shlamei Hagigah. Are you allowed to do it? So that's why the context here is using your Meiser money. You cannot use it for your ola. Anyway, you couldn't use it for your ola because you're not eating and you're not benefiting from the Meiser money. But can you use it for your shlamim? So it says like this. The shlamim mina maaser. Shlamim you can bring, presumably even shlamei Hagigah or shlamei simcha, but we'll see. We'll clarify that from the meiser money.
Rabbi,
Yes.
Question about the chulin. Let's say your makdish money is for the korban for the first day yontif. You
Right.
get to Yerushalayim, you get sick. You can't bring it.
Right.
Okay, it's now chol hamoed.
Right.
That money's no longer chulin.
No, it is. Yeah, right. It's already sanctified. Right.
It's been already sanctified. My intention was to bring it on the first day. I got
Right.
sick. I couldn't bring it.
Right.
Can I then use that same money during chol hamoed, even though it's not chulin?
Well, yes, because first of all, anyway, if you don't bring your olat riyah on the first day, you can bring it on the later days. The primary obligation is the first day, but you can bring it on the later days. But you're saying, you would ask another question. Let's say I sanctified an animal as an olat riyah, and I got sick, and I didn't even make it to Yerushalayim that whole Chag.
Okay.
Can I bring it after the Chag? Yeah, so I mean, it is true that it might have a generic status of an olah. You know, there might be something that doesn't give it a particular character as an olat riyah that limits it, you know, that it can't be used for something else. But it is true, right? No, but I'm just saying it doesn't even have to transform. Like it's not a distinct korban. It's an olah. You know, it was only used towards that purpose. But it is a good question. If that's true, then if I sanctify money for an olah, why can't I use it? I'm not transferring it. But the point is that money was initially sanctified not in the context of an obligation. And when you approach your obligation, you have to be drawing on.
That's a double dipping.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's do it one more time. Olas b'moed bas min achulin. So you're bringing your presumably obligatory olah on chol hamoed. Now the Gemara is going to ask, it shouldn't be the same if you bring it on yontiv, but okay, it has to come from unsanctified funds. But the shlamim that you're bringing on chol hamoed mina maaser can even come from your meiser money, your meiser sheni money. Yom Tov Arisha Shel Pesach, the first day of Pesach, where the Gemara is going to discuss why it says Pesach. Pesach is Lav Dafka. The first day of Yom Tov, which now presumably, again, this is all like in code, because what you have to know is that the Shlamim referred to above was Shlamei Simcha. And Shlamei Simcha can come from Maaser. When it speaks about bringing a Shlamim on the first day, you're supposed to know that means a Shlamei Hagigah, the idea of a Shlamim to celebrate the Chag. So Yontav Arishon Shel Pesach, Beit Shammai mina chulin. It has to come from chulin. Or Beit Hillel mina maaser. It comes from maaser. So again, it's a very cryptic Mishnah. But again, there are these three different korbanot. We'll spell it out when we get to the Gemara. Yisrael yoti midei chovasan b'nedar b'nedavos b'maaser behema. Now, when it comes to the bringing of the first thing, when it says shlami mina maaser, which is shlami simcha, the mitzvah of a samachta b'chagecha, of having simcha. So again, you can use other obligations. As long as you're eating meat of a korban, you know, here conceptually is the difference. Let me just take a step back between shlamei Hagigah and shlamei simcha. Why can shlamei simcha be from money that was already designated, already sanctified from other korbanot, and shlamei Hagigah has to be from unsanctified funds? Because shlamei simcha is not primarily an obligation to bring the korban. It just says v'samachta, rejoice. It's just that the rabbis tell us that rejoicing comes through eating meat, but not just eating any meat, but eating meat that's the meat of a korban, because that somehow puts it in a context of the divine presence. It's not just physical indulgence, it's that joy that comes because it's coming from God and because it was brought as a korban. But it's not an obligation to bring a korban. It's only really an obligation to eat meat of a korban. So therefore, the bringing of the korban can be having brought for some other purpose, for meiser money, for other pre-sanctified funds, no problem. That's why Shlamei Simcha can come from sanctified funds. Shlamei Hagigah is an obligation to bring a korban. Bring a korban, one as an olad, all goes to God because you're appearing in the mikdash, so you give a gift all to God, right? That's not coming empty-handed. And the other of rejoicing, so, you know, it's like the two types of gifts, I guess, that you bring somebody. You can either bring them something that they can use after you leave. Here's a nice gift for you. Thank you very much for having me. Or you bring something, oh, you're coming over. Can I bring something? I'll bring a dessert. We'll all eat the dessert together, right? So the olat riyah is the thing you give God and then you leave, and God has something because he welcomed you into his house. And the Shlamei Hagigah is that you're sort of both getting from it together, and you're having that intimacy, you know, and that rejoicing together with God. So those are the olat riyah and the Shlamei Hagigah are both about bringing the korban, and therefore it has to come from non-sanctified from chulin, as opposed to the Shlamei Simcha, which is just about eating the meat, and that can come from already pre-sanctified
So the
funds.
korban Pesach is more similar to...
We're not talking about the korban pesach.
I know, but it's more similar to Shalmei Simcha.
That is true, because
Shalmei
that's a
Hagigah.
good point, because the korban pesach is the one obligated korban that is brought for the fundamental purpose of eating it, as opposed to offering. offering it. That is correct.
Wait,
Okay,
Shammai.
so we'll discuss Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel later, but they're talking about the Shlami Hagigah. Now, getting back to the Shlami Simcha, which can come from something that's already a korban, Yisrael Yotin Yidei Chovasan, B'nidarim B'nidavos, if you had other vows on obligatory korbanot, again, as long as they were Shlamim, you can bring them and use that meat for Shlami Simcha, B'masa Behema, or Meister, the tithing of Behema, 1 out of every 10 of your newborn animals, you have to bring as a korban and you eat the meat. The Kohanim can even fulfill it, even with Kodshei Kodshim, B'chatot V'Hashamot. Yisrael, if they're coming up l'regel, they're satisfying all their obligations, they're bringing their sin offerings. The Kohanim eat the meat of the sin offerings. They only eat it, in the Beit HaMikdash, but they're still getting a lot of meat, right? So everybody is satisfying all their obligations now. So that can be good for the mitzvah of Simcha. Ubibachor, or the firstborn animals that are given to the Kohanim, which they bring as a korban and eat in all of Yerushalayim. Ubichazev v'shok, the breast and the thigh that is they get from the shlamim that Yisrael is bringing, that also can be eaten in all of Yerushalayim. Any meat of the korbanot that you have access to, you can fulfill your obligation of Simcha. It's got to be good red meat. It can't be fowl, and it can't be grain offerings. Okay.
When it says the Kohanim B'chatot V'Hashamot means their own.
No, the ones that they are eating from
You
others.
don't even have to bring any korban.
Yeah. What?
Meaning Yisrael.
Yeah, exactly that. You don't have to bring the korban. And if Michael brought a shlamim and he's got a lot of meat, he can invite me to eat at his table. It's not about bringing a korban. It's about eating the meat of a korban. Okay, so let's take a look at the Gemara. The first thing the Gemara wants to know is, so the basic point here is what can come from obligatory funds and what can come from sanctified funds and what cannot. So why did we talk about the Ola on Chol HaMoed? It shouldn't matter whether it's Chol HaMoed or whether it's Yantav. So let's take a look. The Gemara says, Ela Olos b'moed hu debos min ha'chulin. Wait a minute. Olos on Chol HaMoed comes from unsanctified fund, presumably again Olat Riyah. Habi Yantav min ha'maser? You mean to tell me that if you're bringing it on the Yantiv, you can bring it from sanctified funds and from Meiser funds? How could that be? Why would it change? Amai, why would that be? It's an obligation. It's a v'chol davar shebachova. Anything that's an obligation, ain't no min ha'chulin, has to come from unsanctified funds. You can't fulfill your obligation from something that's already been sanctified. So maybe what it's really telling us is a second point. Yeah, you're right. The issue of sanctified or unsanctified obviously would not change when you're bringing it. The reason it gave you the scenario of bringing the Ola on Chol HaMoed was to make a different point, that you're not allowed to bring the Olat Riyah on Yantav itself. Now this is quite ironic. We just got through a whole Amud where Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish say the fundamental obligation is to come on the first day Yantav, right? And Lo Yeru Panay Rekam, Ikar HaRegel. But we also mentioned in that discussion that there's a little bit of a problem bringing an Ola on Yantav, a private Ola on Yantav. So the Gemara is now going to say, well, maybe that's what the Mishnah is telling me, that you're not allowed to bring even an Olat Riyah on Yantav. Let's take a look. So it says, the Olas b'moed bos, b'yom tov ena bos. Come on. Who's this going like? Beit Shammai. That would be like Beit Shammai. How do you know? No, we talking to Mishnah and Beitzah. Beit Shammai Yomi. Mivim shlomim. You can bring a shlomim on Yantav because you'll eat the meat. So you could do things for your food purposes on Yantav. The Ein Som Kinalem, but you don't rest your hands on them because that's like that goes back to that old debate, not just of Beit Shammai, but of Shammai and Hillel and all that one of the oldest debates of doing smicha on a shlamim on Yantav. Because is that like using the animal, like riding on an animal, making use of it? Because, it's not strictly necessary, or yotzei the korban without it. So they'll let you do the bare minimum. You can bring a shlamim because you'll eat the meat, but don't do smicha. Avolo, you certainly can't bring an ola on Yantav because you're not getting any benefit from it. You can bring a shlamim and an ola. You can do smicha on it. So now this is wild, because if you just had that debate, you might think that they're talking about a random ola. Like just stam, I want to bring an ola. The way the Gemara seems to be suggesting here, and Tosfos has a whole discussion about this, is that according to Beit Shammai, you're not even allowed to bring an olat riyah. Even your obligated ola can only be brought in Chol HaMoed, which is like a wild idea. But the Gemara is not even willing to contemplate that read of the Mishnah, because why would we have the Mishnah going like Beit Shammai? But what we do have here is a possible read of Beit Shammai that you cannot even bring your obligatory ola, your olat riyah on Yantav. But the Gemara rejects that from the meaning of the Mishnah. No. Don't read the Mishnah that way. You have to say that implicitly some words are missing. And this is really the point of the Mishnah. Of course you bring your Olat Riyah on the first day Yantav. Here's the point. Olot nidarim v'nidavot b'moed bos b'yom tov einam bos. Your general olot, cannot come on Yontif. Even Beit Hillel would admit that your general olot have to come on Chol HaMoed because there's no allowance to violate Yontif for a generic ola, non-obligatory ola. Okay, that wasn't the debate of Beit Hillel Beit Shammai. Even Beit Hillel would agree with that. So b'moed bas b'Yontif. Va'ola riyah, your ola of appearing before in the temple, your obligatory ola, ba'afilu b'Yontif. That, like Beit Hillel, can come even on Yontif. That's an obligation. That comes even on Yontif. And when you're bringing your olat riyah, can only come from chulin. So again, it's a very hard read of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says olos b'moed bos mina chulin. It's really a problem because the olos that have to come on chol moed are non-obligatory, so those aren't limited to chulin. That's the olah that comes on Yontif that's limited to chulin. So it's a real problem in the Mishnah, and the Gemara has to do real gymnastics in order to make read of it. Olos b'moed, non-obligatory olos come on chol moed. Then there are separate olos that have to come in a chulin. Those are the obligatory ones that are brought even on Yontif. So a very hard read of the Mishnah. Okay, but that's all we're going to get out of that. Okay, so that's point number one, that there is a Beit Shammai that won't even let you bring your olat riyah on Yontif, totally against everything we've been assuming. We say, like Beit Hillel, you do bring it, and when you bring your olat riyah, whenever you bring it on Yontif or on Chol HaMoed, it can only come from unsanctified funds. Now, the Shlamei Simcha, and now the Gemara helps us spell out the Mishnah. The next line of the Mishnah that says Shlamim is not talking about all Shlamim. It's not talking about Shlamei Hagigah. When it gives you an allowance to use Meiser and other sanctified funds, that's only Shlamei Simcha, which is basically about the meat and not about the korban. The Shlamei Simcha boin af mina ma'aser, that comes even from Meiser funds. The Hagigah's Yontif, now how about a Hagigah? That's the other Shlamim, right? But that's the one that it is an obligation to bring the korban. So Yontif Rishon Shel Pesach, we'll discuss in a minute why it's talking about Pesach, but let's bracket that for now. The Hagigah, that's a debate of Beit Hillel Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai Yomi mina chulin and Beit Hillel Yomi mina maaser. So that's a debate of Beit Hillel Beit Shammai. So what we have to now, we're slowly figuring out this Mishnah. This Mishnah is very dense and cryptic. So the first thing we've pointed out is when it says Olan Chol HaMoed, it doesn't really mean Chol HaMoed. It really means Yontif. Now, the second thing we point out is that the shlamim that can come from sanctified funds is shlamei simcha, and that the debate of Beit Hillel Beit Shammai is about Hagigah. So now we have two things left to figure out. Number one, why it mentions Hagigah of Pesach, why not just a general Hagigah? And number two, why Beit Hillel would allow a Hagigah to come from sanctified funds if a Hagigah is an obligatory sacrifice. So let's take a look. Now, those are the two things we have left to sort of just unpack of this Mishnah. Okay, we taught similarly. So free will olot come only on Chol HaMoed. And an olos riyah comes even on Yontif, or primarily should be brought on Yontif. The rest of Chol HaMoed is only a backup if you didn't do it on Yontif. When it comes, so the obligatory olat riyah can only come from unsanctified funds. The shlamei simcha and the shlamim that are about rejoicing on Yontif, that can come even from Maser, because that's not primarily about, again, the korban, it's about the meat. The Hagigah Yontif Harishon Shel Pesach, and the Hagigah on Pesach, Beit Shammai Yomi mina chulin and Beit Hillel Yomi mina maaser. Okay, that's the debate of Beit Hillel Beit Shammai. So now we still have to figure out, why did you mention Pesach, and why is Beit Hillel allowing you to do it mina maaser if it's an obligation? So I have no idea. So Ma'ishna Hagigah Yontif Harishon Shel Pesach. Now let's do this one by one. So why, if we're talking about the aspect of Hagigah, why are you specifically talking about it in the context of Pesach? So Amar Rav Ashi, Hakamash Malan, this is teaching us Hagigah's Chamisha Sar in Hagigah Chazabaras Alo, because it's to distinguish it from the Hagigah on the 14th. Okay, because, right, as you might be aware, there was a Hagigah that was brought with the Korban Pesach. And the purpose of that was, and that was brought, it's called a Hagigah, but ironically, it's not brought on the Chag, it's brought Erev HaChag. It's eaten the night, right? But it was brought on the 14th, like the Korban Pesach. So it can't be a real Hagigah. A real Hagigah is a Korban brought on the Chag itself. The purpose of that was because there's an idea that the Pesach has to be eaten al hasova, when you're full and sated. So it's not like you don't eat it in a ravenous way. You don't come to break bones. Also an issue with Korban Pesach. So you bring another Korban, another shlamim together with the Pesach. So that fills you up, and you leave the Pesach till the end. And that Korban that you bring with it is called a Hagigah Sarbasar, or sometimes even more explicitly, Hagigah Sarbasar Haba Ima Pesach. Okay, so that is not a strict obligation. That's a means of not eating the Pesach in a ravenous way, a means of filling you up. And by the way, there are times you wouldn't have to bring it. If I'm just bringing my Pesach, I'm bringing it with 3 people, and we're splitting a whole nice lamb between the 3 of us, so we don't need any other korban. If we have 20 people that are joining into our group, we need another korban. Okay, so that, because it's not a strict obligation, that Hagigah, quote unquote Hagigah, can come from sanctified funds, can come from Maser funds. So when it speaks about a Hagigah having to, the Hagigah of the 15th of Pesach, the first day of Pesach, coming from unsanctified funds, that would also be true about the Hagigah of Sukkot, and it would be true about the Hagigah of Shavuos. But the reason it mentioned the Hagigah of the first day of Pesach was to say, as opposed to the Hagigah of Erev Pesach, that can come from sanctified funds. Okay, so let's just read that. Chagigas abasa lo. Alma kasaver, so you see this is of the position. Chagigas abasa lav deoraisa. It's not a biblical obligation to bring it. Now, again, it could mean when you bring it, it has some, fits into some biblical category, but there's not a strict obligation to bring it. Bringing it is only a means of not eating Pesach when you're starving. And again, if you have a small enough group, you wouldn't need it. And because it's not a strict obligation, that Hagigah can come from Maser funds. But the Hagigah of the first day of Yantiv, whether it's Pesach, Shavuos, or Sukkot, is a strict obligation. And that has to come from unsanctified funds. And we only mention Pesach to distinguish it from the Hagigah of the 14th. You had a question, David?
Yes. A little more about why sanctified funds required korbanot, that you can use it for optional
right.
korbanot, but you can't use it
for required korbanot. Right.
See, with the face of it, you would just the opposite.
Why? Why would you do the opposite?
Optional, you might have or you might not. If you've already sanctified it for the
right,
and you know you're going to be doing these things for the mikdash, then why can't you use those ones?
Right. So, I think that the example I gave at the beginning, I probably shouldn't have given that, because you are right. It gets back, like, if I just generically sanctify something, why can't I just reframe that as having, when I sort of spoke sanctified funds, I said, you had your money and you sanctified it, and now can I use it? So if I just generically sanctified it, why can't I now in retrospect say, maybe that sanctification was exactly the beginning of the process of bringing my Hagigah or bringing my Ola. So it's better, so you're right. And it's better, therefore, I was imprecise. I shouldn't have framed it that way. It's better to speak specifically of the example that the Gemara gives here, which is, or the Mishnah gives of Maser. I took my tithe, and it says, bring this tithe up and use the money and bring the korban. So I'm already satisfying one demand and obligation from this, right, to bring this up to Yerushalayim and eat it. I can't use it to satisfy another demand. Or the example not in the Maser context is not just that I set aside money, but that I accepted upon myself, and I said, I accept upon myself an obligation to bring a shlamim. I didn't say to bring a shlamim. I made that a free will, freely obligated type of a thing, not something that's satisfying some divinely imposed obligation. So I just said, I obligate myself to bring a shlamim. And now when it comes time, you know what? I'll satisfy my obligation to bring a shlamim by also doing something that the Torah is obligating me to do, which is to bring this shlamei simcha. So that seems like inappropriate, right? You had framed this as your own obligation, and now you're using it to satisfy a divinely imposed obligation. Or something is one type of a divinely imposed obligation, maser, and you're using it to satisfy a different divinely imposed obligation. But you're right. The simple case that I gave before was imprecise. If you just sanctify money without being preceded by an obligation, then you could use that money towards this type of a purpose. Yes.
Then why can you use it or pay for once I've designated the money, I'm now only an agent for the money and no longer.
Right.
How can I then decide I'm going to direct the money
right.
for a voluntary?
Well, you direct the money anyway. You bring your Meiser money up to Yerushalayim. You have latitude to decide on a wide range of things about what you're going to use it for, right? You can use it for wine, or you can use it for beer, you can use it for meat, or you can use it for bread, or you can use it for. So why not use it for bringing a korban, which still allows you to benefit from the meat of it? It's a type of a way of buying meat, but in a way that's even better. That brings it in in type of a religious context. So that seems to be the idea. Okay, so now let's just read a little bit more in the Gemara and figure out what this issue of Beit Hillel. Because why is Beit Hillel now, if it's an obligation, this Shlamei Hagigah, why are they giving you more latitude? So Amar Mar, Beis Hillel mina maser. Amai, why is that? Davar shebechovahu. It's an obligation. This Hagigah, and it's an obligation as a korban. The kol davar shebechova ain't avala mina chulin. Something that's an obligation can only come from, non-sanctified. Can't come from maser money or from something that's already part of another obligation. So Amar Ula Bitofel. What we're talking about is that you sort of you do it as an add-on. So basically, you have your own unsanctified funds, non-obligatory funds that you use to bring your korban Hagigah. And then, however, the point is, you got a big family. You want to be eating a lot of meat, and what you want to do is you want to bring a much bigger korban. So can you add to your base funds? Can you add from your maser funds? And that we will allow in the context of a Hagigah, since the base amount was already paid for with your Beit Shammai would say no, with your non-obligatory money. B'tofel. Chizkiah Amar. Now, what does this tofel mean? There are two scenarios. Chizkiah says toflim behema lebehema. You bring your first animal as your Hagigah. That's your obligatory Hagigah. You want to use your meister money to bring other animals, fine. But your first animal was unambiguously your Hagigah that came from your own funds. The ain't toflim mos. You cannot add mixed money. $20 of my money, $50 of the meister money, and I'll buy a $70 behema. Because then there's no one thing that's all from your own funds. So that makes a lot of sense. Rabbi Yochanan says, of course, the exact opposite. Tovli mos lemos, you can mix funds. The ain't tovlim beima lebeima, you cannot add a beima to a beima. Now, of course, it's bizarre, because if I want to bring another animal, why do I have to call it a Hagigah? The first one was my Hagigah, the rest one I don't call my Shlomei Simcha. So it's not exactly clear, what would be the problem, why you would have to be in a position where you have to or want to frame all of them as a Hagigah. But where Rabbi Yochanan, somehow that's seen as the case. You want to look at all of this eating of the meat and all of these korbanot as now like an expanded Hagigah korban. So Rabbi Yochanan would like each animal to at least have some of your own money in it, some of your chulin money. And that allows it. That's enough. Once some of it is coming from your money, they're all part of your Hagigah korban. Whereas actually Ula's position in my mind makes a lot more sense. That one of them be your obligation, and the rest that can be add-on. Okay, so Tanya Kavasi to Chizkiah, we learned like Chizkiah, but Tanya Kavasi to Rabbi Yochanan, we learned it brighter like Rabbi Yochanan. Tanya Kavasi to Rabbi Yochanan, first we'll start with Rabbi Yochanan. Misas, it says from the giving of your hands, Milamid Chara Mevi Chovaso Minachulin. It says when it says that you bring your karbanon misas yadcha sher titain, so vasisa chag shavuos l'Hashem Elokecha. So that's talking chag, the Hagigah. That's exactly what we're talking about. Misas, the giving of the generosity of your hands. So we understand that to be something that's coming from totally your own funds. Shara mevi chovaso minachulin. Where do you get this idea that at least for the Hagigah, again, because Hagigah is like a little bit has aspects of simcha, right? To celebrate the Chag and bring a shlomim. So there's aspects of the simcha aspect as well. Not just about bringing the korban, it's also about eating the meat. So that's why it's in this interesting middle zone where a base amount has to come from your own, but you can also add to it from these other funds. So yeah, that's the funny thing. Why can't you be Yotzei Simcha by eating the meat of the Hagigah? I don't know. As God blesses you, from everything that God has blessed you. So even from the stuff that is already sanctified and already master money. Anyway, there the idea of arev, to add mix, indicates a mixing of the funds. Okay? Now we talk like Chizkiah. Misas milamid shada mevi chovaso minachulin. So from the free giving of your hands, it has to come from unsanctified and not unobligatory funds. Mikan ve'elach minama. I'm sorry, that's apply. Shamnecha minachulin. Beis Shammai omim yom harishon minachulin mikan ve'elach minamaser. The first day any Hagigah you bring has to be from chulin. Afterwards from maser. Beit Hillel omrim achila rishona min chulin. No. The first eating you do, that's from chulin. That's your Hagigah from your own funds. Mikan ve'elach, a later eating, which presumably Chizkiah is reading to mean a second korban, that's mina maser. Okay, so that's the debate of Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai. But again, according to Chizkiah, it's only a later animal. So on the one hand, I understand Chizkiah seems a lot better, right? One animal is unambiguously a Hagigah. I just don't understand why you have to call the rest of them Hagigah to have a problem. Right? Why not just call the rest of it Shlom Simcha or something? So I don't really understand what's framing the rest as a Hagigah that makes it an issue. Anyway, the Gemara continues. V'shar kol yemos haPesach, and the rest of Pesach. Interesting, we're assuming Pesach as the Chag, which is what we were assuming in the Mishnah. Adam yotzei d'chavasu b'maser behema. Okay, then everybody would agree that on the rest of Pesach you can bring from pre-sanctified funds and from maser funds, and not only maser funds of Meiser Sheni, but even maser behema. Maser famous animal you have to bring as a korban. So the Gemara now asks just a simple question. 1 minute. But you just got through telling me that according to Beit Hillel, on the first day Yantiv, after the first korban, you can bring it from sanctified funds and from maser funds. So why not even on the first day bring it from maser behema? It sounds like even Beit Hillel would only allow you to use maser behema as opposed to other forms of sanctified funds. He would only allow you to use maser behema on Chol HaMoed. Why not use it on the first day Yantiv? So let's take a look. So the Gemara says, Yom Tov my time alo. Why not use maser behema on Yantiv? Amar Rashi, Dilma Asila Suri B'Yantav. You might come to take Maaser on Yantav. If we let you use Maaser Behema on Yantav, you'll come to take Maaser on Yantav. What would be so bad of taking Maaser Behema on Yantav? V'yefshel B'Yantav. You're not allowed to. Mishum Sikrasa, because of the red of the dye. Because when you would count them 10, the 10th one you hit with a stick that had like paint on it to mark it, and that would be like Tzoveya and like Kosev on Yantav. Now the funny thing is, why did it have to say that? You're not in general allowed to take Trumas and Maisus on Yantav. Why did it have to say this special reason? So the reason you're normally not allowed to take Trumas and Maisus on Yantav is because it fixes the dough, the produce. The produce cannot be eaten without Trumas and Maisus taken, so it makes it fixed and edible. But that's not true about Meiser Behema. Meiser Behema, the animals aren't tevel, aren't forbidden until you take it. So therefore, if there's a problem of taking it, it's not the same reason that it makes it now edible and fixing it. So the reason you can't take Meiser Behema is because of this painting of the sheep. So in the other cases, there's a tikkun. Here, there's not a tikkun. You fulfill your obligation, but you're not metaking the sheep. Okay. My mashma the high misas. Last point. Where do you get the idea that this word misat means from your own money and not from like pre-designated money or pre-obligated money? The high lishna dechulinhu means from your own money. Tichsiv vayasem hamelech Achashverosh mas ala aretz. So misat somehow is money that's being taken from your own income and from your own funds, which is exactly what the tax was. All right. So we will end here today, and we'll pick up tomorrow, just wrapping up this aspect about Shlamei Simcha. We've now dealt with Olat Re'iyah and with Shlamei Hagigah. The basic point being that things that are already a pre-existing obligation, David was right to correct me, not just money you sanctify, but that's satisfying a pre-existing obligation. You cannot do double duty for your Olat Re'iyah and your Shlamei Simcha. And these are things that, Shlamei Hagigah, things that are brought even on the first day of Yantiv. These can be brought even the Olat Re'iyah. And what we did see is this strange idea, though, that Shlamei Simcha can be mixed, which maybe is not so, actually, I said that wrong again. Shlamei Hagigah can be mixed, which is again not so strange because Shlamei Hagigah inhabits some space between Olat Re'iyah and Shlamei Simcha. It's about the korban, but it's also about the meat. So the idea that it can be mixed makes sense. But why the Gemara has these problems of adding another animal, why we have to frame the later animal as a Hagigah, what would make you want to frame these things as Hagigah rather than as something else once you're already fulfilling your obligation, right? That is not so clear. Tomorrow we will continue and we'll see the aspect of the Shlamei Simcha.
Rabbi Linzer.
And Michael will take us there. Yes.